Well, hey, on today's show, we have the host of the podcast Disney Insights. He's also the president of Performance Journeys, has incredible knowledge and history with the Walt Disney World organization. Come on, welcome to the show, Jeff Comer. Awesome. Well, Jeff, thank you so much for being on the show. Glad to have you.
Oh, happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me, Alec.
Yeah, of course. And so for our listeners today, I'll have introduced you kind of right before this show started, but maybe talk a little bit about like who you are and what you do.
So I always seem to start by saying I'm actually from Phoenix, Arizona, originally, and
Yeah.
those are my roots. And I grew up there, loved that experience, and but the last 30 years of my life have been spent here in Florida, particularly in Central Florida.
Yeah.
And in the process, I have really, over the several decades, been in the business of helping organizations in the public, private, nonprofit realm, doesn't matter which, big or small, helping organizations improve, whether it's their leadership, whether it's their morale, employee morale, their team engagement, whether it's their customer experience or customer loyalty. It's kind of all around those kinds of topics and themes, and have just absolutely enjoyed doing that. Have kind of two companies that focus in on that, and but most people kind of know me because I had been with the Walt Disney Company for many years, and had the opportunity there to actually provide those kinds of experiences to individuals who came to Disney looking for more answers about Disney's approach to customer service or to engaging the workforce and so forth. So this is, my family and I have been here for many decades, and this is home, and we just love it here.
Yeah, I love that. So the episode right before this one comes out is actually interviewing one of my friends that's on the Florida Man podcast. And we just literally spent an episode talking about how much we love our state and like love this area. We're in Central Florida as well. And I imagine that so much of what you learned from like working with the Walt Disney organization like that has stemmed into what you're doing today and training businesses, training nonprofits and all that. Maybe we should start from the beginning. Like, how did you come to get connected to working at Walt Disney?
Well, my youngest memory of Disney, and it usually starts with a love of all things Disney. My youngest memory of Disney, or my youngest memory of my father, was actually walking me down Main Street at Disneyland in California.
Wow.
When I couldn't have been more than 2 or 3. And I have always kind of attached my family and Disney together. And that has been kind of a big part of me. I remember when I was, I think it was 5th grade, 4th or 5th grade, growing up in Arizona, and there was actually a day where it rained, and there was no being out on the playground. So I went to the library, and I was kind of hunting through some books and old magazines, and I found this National Geographic called The Magical Worlds of Walt Disney. And I was absolutely transformed by it. It had a map of Disneyland and of images of audio animatronics and how the animation process worked. And it absolutely fascinated me. And I became more and more interested in it. In fact, after I kept going back to the library, even though it got sunny, kept going back to the library every day to read more and more and more. And finally, I got the courage to ask the librarian to if I could keep the magazine, and she actually did allow me to keep it, and I still have it today. It's the first piece in a very, very large library, and I became fascinated by it. We went to Disneyland that summer. uh, as I requested my parents, and we. I remember the Country Bear Jamboree had opened up, and the Electrical Parade had opened up. It was 1972, and I was just enamored. The
Yeah.
Haunted Mansion, the Pirates of the Caribbean, and so I just said we got to do this next summer. And my parents, I think, at this point were thinking, okay, this is a little on the much side here.
Hmm.
So we didn't go, and so I swore in my wrath that would never happen again. And so I started my own lawn mowing business where I raised the money
To go
to
back. Yeah.
actually take my family to Disney as the summer vacation. I paid for the gas, I paid
Wow.
for the
That's
hotel.
dedication. Yeah.
That is, and when you put your soul into it like that,
Hmm.
you're in big trouble. So
Yeah.
I kind of came up a little bit as a nerd in the theater and the arts and film and cinema. The 70s were not kind to Disney. Disney films were not a pretty thing in the 70s. And I actually wrote Ron Miller, who was the son-in-law of Walt Disney,
Hmm.
who was the head of the studios, as a 16-year-old, and said, I really want to create films for Disney
Yeah.
when I finished college. And could I have a tour of the Walt Disney Studios? And he granted that to me. And so I actually toured it as a 16-year-old. Every soundstage at Disney was shut to nobody coming in because they were working on a big production, top secret production that would be known as the Black Hole, which truly was a black hole for the company. Ultimately, it was
What
a
was it?
terrible film.
Oh, it was
But
a
it
film
was so
called The
cool
Black
to
Hole.
be there at the studios. What?
It was a film called The Black Hole, or
Yes, it was a film
okay.
called The Black Hole. A lot of people don't know that actually Disney had first rights on Star Wars, and they didn't get it.
Wow.
And it ended up being sent over to 20th Century Fox.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a missed opportunity because
Yeah.
everybody who saw that film when it came out in 77 said, well, this is the kind of film Disney should be doing. Only Disney didn't do the film.
They passed
And
up
that
on
was
it.
years, of course,
Came back
before.
around. Yeah.
Yeah, it came back around. That was years before Lucas purchased or Disney purchased Lucasfilm. But at any rate, I just had this interest in doing film and television, and I found out in college that was not my gift. And I remember doing this film on how to change a tire. And it was a drudge, and I hated it, and I didn't know what to do. And I really was at a standstill. So I actually went and served a 2-year mission for my church, for my faith, and that sent me to the jungles of Colombia for 2 years. And I kind of opened up my mind to many things and to many opportunities. And I came back, and I actually got into the business of training and development and organizational design, and ended up getting a master's in that degree.
Yeah.
Which required writing a thesis, but I didn't know what to write it on. I tried many things, and my professor told me, do something you absolutely love because you're going to hate this project by the time you're done with it. And my thought was I should write on educational media and Disney.
Yeah.
And so I wrote the archives. The archive said yes. I spent weeks at the studios again, studying and researching, and wrote my thesis around Disney educational media. And that was cool, but I didn't know where that would go. So I actually started going into the business of, actually, my first job was creating, as a contractor. I was never in the military, but my first job was creating F-16 aircrew fighter training for the Air Force. And kind of got involved in that, very high tech, with simulators and all forms of training and development platforms. And I had enough money at that time. I saved. We were living, I'd married, and my wife and I were living in Tucson. We saved enough to go to Walt Disney World. Have never been there.
Yeah.
And we went there for a week, thought it was amazing, hoped that it would create hope that we could go back 10 years from then. Came back to my job and the contract had ended. And long story short, through a series of experiences over the next 2 or 3 years, I ended up in Florida working on another Air Force contract, which ultimately led me to Orlando.
Yeah. And
And
being near Disney. Yeah.
and being near Disney, what a important idea that is.
Yeah.
And so I really looked at opportunities there, and it's a long story. I'm trying to make it a little shorter, but
Yeah.
a friend of mine actually was the personal assistant to the head of the Disney University at that time at Walt Disney World, and she was going to be taken out for Secretary's Day, and she said, "Where did you want to go for lunch?" And she said, "I don't want you to take me out for lunch. I want you to meet this guy."
Mm.
And I had an opportunity to meet her. Actually, I was working at that point contractually for the marketing group at Disney.
Wow.
Because I had been able to create online learning using different online learning platforms, authorware, and so forth. And so they had hired me to actually build the first platform, online learning platform, where you could go in and actually click on the different parks, click on different attractions, hotels, ballrooms, meeting space, rooms, different rooms, all golf courses, bars, everything. This massive thing that had never been done at Disney before. And so I was actually working on that, and my office was above the palace at Italy at Epcot.
Oh, that's
And
cool.
so I
Yeah.
played the palace, listening to Italian arias all the day long. And but at any rate, this individual came and visited me and ended up getting a job with her, working with what became the Disney Institute. It
Yeah.
kind of went through a couple of name changes, but ended up working with the Disney Institute. So what we did is Disney University was in charge of training their own cast members, their employees. But the Disney Institute, there was a book that came out in the 80s said, called In Search of Excellence.
Yeah.
And they said, if you really want to see what great organizations do, you ought to go visit them. And the one that they really named a lot was Disney.
Yeah.
And that started with people calling up on the phone and saying, "Hey, I want to know more about how you approach customer service or handle your people and so forth. And I want to see the utilidor, the tunnel underneath the Magic Kingdom and so forth." And that started a whole business.
Yeah.
And that was actually the business that I was responsible for. I was originally in charge of customer service programming. So it was fun because actually my job was not just one place, like one resort or one attraction or something.
Yeah.
I literally was all over the entire property. I was on top of the seas. I was on top of the tower. One of the few people who've been to actually the rooftop at the top of the Tower of Terror, and more places that you can imagine. But we use those places as places for guests to come and learn more about best practices
Yeah.
at Disney.
Well,
And that's kind of how I got into the whole Disney thing.
It's incredible. Like that's it's so cool to hear. What's actually funny is when you were saying that, I remembered like I actually did the Disney Leadership Institute, which maybe is part of that, what you were talking about. Back in 2015, I did my master's, and part of that, obviously being here in Central Florida, it was kind of easier to do. They took our crew over there for a week and just got to experience, like, of course, everybody sees, when you think about Disney, it's the main thing is the parks and the magic of it all. But what lies underneath so much of that is like how great Disney is. And we were literally just talking about this on last week's episode, is like the innovation of Disney World and the leadership and the way that they train, not just like they train everybody, right? The way that they bring up the entirety of that organization to really push forward in this one goal of creating a magical experience for guests in parks, through the golf courses, through all of those kind of things, you know?
Disney's not perfect, but
Hmm.
they work very hard,
Yeah.
and they are very intentional and very organized about
Hmm.
how they approach it. In fact, there's a story of Michael Eisner, former CEO, and Frank Wells, who was CEO of the company, president of the company, and the two of them had gone in one day and watched one of our programs
Yeah.
for about 45 minutes, and they stepped out, and Eisner said, "See, they're telling all their secrets. We can't have them doing these programs. People are going to know all their secrets, how we do our job." And Frank Wells, who was the more level of the two, said, "Michael, look, they're not giving away the secrets. Here's the secret. The secret, Michael, is we work very, very, very hard
Yeah.
to do what we pull off and what we do. And most people do not have the energy to work
Hmm.
that hard to do it."
Yeah.
And so the program stayed on, but there's a big nugget of truth in that.
Hmm. Yeah. I
That
remember.
Disney works very hard to do what it does.
Certainly. Yeah. I remember two big takeaways from that week of just what Disney does. One was like, and this is an idea you might hear a lot, but it's very true for what I think Disney does, is the idea of like, number one, it's try, fail, learn, right? Like you're gonna go for something, and if it does great, excellent. Like learn from it still. But if it doesn't do great, then it's like, okay, hey, maybe that didn't work out, but we're gonna learn from that and continue to be better. That's a great, like, I think that's great. It's great advice for any kind of organization, like to learn from those mistakes and to get better. Another one that like stood out to me, and this is so like small, and maybe it seemed insignificant at the time, but I've remembered it, is like they took us on a tour of the back, and you realize like Disney doesn't waste time with what they do. And by that I mean like they don't paint or decorate anything in the back. They're not going to spend all this time or waste this effort. That's like I remember going behind Mexico in Epcot and saying like it's just completely kind of blank and unpainted there. But it's because the efforts there are actually pushed towards what ultimately like matters. And I think that's actually there's probably a really great nugget of truth like in that and in that work ethic.
It is very industrial behind the scenes.
Yeah.
People are all excited about seeing the magic behind it. The fact of the matter is it's industrial. It's intended to be very efficient. It's intended to be very purposeful and to accomplish its job. Actually, one wall behind Mexico was painted with big palm leaves. And the palm leaves were an effort to say, okay, that Swan and Dolphin Hotel we're painting, should we do it in this leaf pattern? And so they actually used the back of Mexico to figure out whether they like that design enough.
Just like a blank
to then
canvas.
carry it over.
Yeah.
Exactly. In fact, there was another place behind Coronado's Caribbean Beach, and it was kind of Hotel Row, but it was kind of backstage, and literally it was one hotel room after the next. One was beach, one was boardwalk, one was Coronado, one was Caribbean, and they would test all of their hotel rooms with one little module, down to the towels, everything.
Yeah.
And they would, and back in the day, Eisner would go and stay the night in that room to see if it was legitimate. But going back to your earlier comment, boy, that is so critical to build a culture where people are allowed to learn from their mistakes.
Yeah. Very true.
And it drives so much of that engagement level with employees that it's just such an important part of what makes an organization work. And when it doesn't, it's messy.
Yeah. And something else that I love, that learning from Disney too, and I've seen this replicated in some other organizations and even churches that I know of. The just the language you use too, and how important that is, right? Like nothing's ever under construction at Disney, right? It's being reimagined. And that's what I love, like the language and and like, the specific about how we say certain things and how we communicate it.
Language matters. And it sets, for a simple one is graveyard shift. Disney
Yeah.
doesn't use that term. They use third shift or um, to describe those late night hours.
Yeah.
And then they make sure that they throw breakfast and have everybody in management come out and throw them a breakfast so
That's
that they
awesome.
know that they count and that
Hmm.
they matter.
Yeah.
And truly phenomenal things happen in the middle of the night
Yeah,
in
I
those
bet. Yeah.
parks. So it's kind of cool.
That's awesome. Well, you have been doing this podcast. I want to get into some of the business side of stuff too that you do, but like this podcast that you've been doing for Disney, you've been doing that for quite a while, right?
Yeah, you know what? I started, I think, in 2017, and then I wasn't sure if I think maybe I had done three in 2018.
Yeah.
It wasn't very impressive. And then as we went into COVID, it was the thing that kept me alive.
Hmm.
I felt like, and it comes back actually to another story back in the days when I was with Disney because my manager and I felt like there should be a book. There were other people writing best in business books about Disney,
Yeah.
and we thought there should be that Disney should write that book.
Hmm.
And so we proposed doing that, and Eisner greenlighted it, but he insisted that it be a ghostwriter who wrote it.
Hmm.
And so I had to take all of my materials and hand it over to this individual and walk them through it. And then I waited a year and nothing happened.
Hmm.
And so I inquired, and it turned out the individual left, didn't want to do the project. So we inquired again, could we please do this? And they said, yeah, but we're going to have to hire another ghostwriter. Well, after that, I kind of left the organization for a number of reasons. But when the book finally came out, I was like, you know what? They're not getting this quite right.
Hmm.
And so I really felt strongly that somebody needed to share these stories, these messages
Yeah.
that come back from the heritage of Walt Disney, Roy, but also in the Michael Eisner and Bob Iger years. There are so many great lessons to learn.
For sure.
And so I started actually doing blog posts. I started writing for a Disney blog back in 2007.
Hmm.
And I did that for a number of years. And then I started writing, and then I started using that as a vehicle to writing several books.
Yeah.
And I enjoyed that. But it was, you spend the better part of a year at least trying to pull together that book. And I kind of wanted something a little bit more instantaneous. And people had introduced me to podcasts. And so I took it on. And during COVID, it was a blessing because even Walt Disney World had completely shut down. And there was no place to go. My business was slow at that moment, although it ended up picking up quite shortly after that. But doing virtual stuff. But I got into the energy of just doing podcast after podcast. I was doing 3 a week at the
height of it.
the height of it.
Yeah.
But I love doing it, and I love doing it because I could tell these stories.
Yeah. And the show's called Disney Insights, right?
Yes.
And
yeah, it's gone through a couple of titles, but it's called Disney Insights.
Yeah. And kind of what can a listener, like if somebody was to leave this show, go check it out. Like, what are some of the things? Obviously, a little bit it's in the title there. But what are some of the things like you're kind of covering, and how are you getting? I mean, obviously, some of this is from experience, but how are you like also staying up to date with what's going on at Disney?
Well, I stay up to date because I live here in the heart of Disney,
Yeah.
and I've known a lot of folks. I love them dearly, my colleagues. But when they left Disney, they really left Disney. They didn't want to come back. But I've always had a love of Disney, and my working at Disney didn't sour me to my being in Disney. Today, I just released a podcast that had everything to do with how Snow White is found in all the parks worldwide.
Yeah.
And what that looks like. Snow White was so pivotal to the success of the organization that was such a risk on his behalf. And there's a great story when he was out of money and the film hadn't been completed, and Bank of America came on a Saturday afternoon to take a look at it, and he was very nervous, but he showed this banker the real whatever was completed of it. And then the lights came back on, and the banker got ready to leave and got out to the car, and Walt said, well, what did you think? And the maker said, that's going to make you a boatload of money.
Wow.
And it did. It made him $8 million, which in those in the 30s was just an amazing amount. And he took it, and then he takes it, and he builds a studio, which was one of our previous podcasts we just covered because it's the 85th anniversary of that studio.
Wow.
And how he was so intentional in his design of that studio and creating a place that was perfect for his employees to work at. And, we talk about environments like Google and others. Disney was like one of the first to create a workplace environment that was so, and people come to it still today. And it's kind of like a college campus, like setting grass and flowers. And it's a wonderful setting. So we talked about that last week. We talked about the end of It's Tough to Be a Bug. A lot of people don't know that attraction was not created by Pixar. Pixar was overwhelmed at that point. They had just successfully done Toy Story. They were doing It's a Bug's Life, but they didn't have time to go do an attraction as well. And Eisner, hearing that, where they were going to do Bugs, thought, oh, it'd be great if we had a Bugs show inside the theater, the Tree of Life. And so actually, that's why you only see Flick and Hopper in that show. All these other bugs that you've never seen in the movie, because they hadn't even figured out. In fact, the actor who voiced Hopper hadn't even been selected, so it was actually an animator who did it.
Oh, really?
It did the voice for that. But at that time, they were trying to finish Bug's Life. Disney wanted them to do Toy Story 2.
Yeah,
and they were overwhelmed. And John Lasseter, who was over Pixar, thought they were going to do Toy Story 2 direct-to-video. You know how those direct-to-video things, they were not good. And he stopped and he said, we're not going to do this direct-to-video. We're going to keep the quality, and we're going to do it as a film. And Disney said, that's fine. You can release it to the theaters, but you still have your December deadline of this next year because McDonald's is on the hook. Or McDonald's has already created their Happy Meal toys for this thing. And so they went into overdrive between Bug's Life and Toy Story 2 to build. And people were exhausted. People were getting carpal tunnel syndrome. They were exhausted. And it came to a point where on one occasion, one of the animators got to work early in the morning, was there all day. Around noon, his wife called, said, how come you didn't take the kid to the babysitter? And he realized he had left the kid in the car. Small child. They ran out to the car. They threw water on the kid. Fortunately, the kid survived and there was no damage.
Oh my God.
But it sent a message into Pixar that when you have people who really love and are really committed to something, they will go above and beyond, and it may not be a good thing.
Yeah.
And so they had to make a lot of changes at Pixar in terms of how they treated its artists, how they provided an environment that was more conducive and supportive of their situation while still trying to figure out how to make the deadline. So these are the kinds of messages that have application, because maybe you have an organization where people are committed and dedicated and they'll go the whole 9 yards, but they may go too far if you don't put the skids on and make sure that they are supported and helped.
Well, it's almost like there's a breaking point, like there's every organization would love to have people that are just so committed to the task at hand and to the mission and the vision, but there comes a point where it actually becomes detrimental to them, which ultimately then turns around and has that person leaving. Wow. What a crazy story.
These are the stories I like to tell in my podcast. I love talking about the latest and greatest attractions and everything. But oftentimes there's a story behind the attraction. There's a story behind the experience. There's lessons to be learned, and they can be applied, what I call free souvenirs for anybody who listens. Free souvenirs you can take back home and apply to your own organization. And it's just fun doing that podcast.
So taken from everything you've learned from Disney, obviously the work that you've been doing within your podcast and all, how how are you transitioning that into like the organization that you started in helping these businesses? And maybe that was kind of in between. Maybe that was even before the podcast started.
Well, it has been. It's been going on I've been really working with organizations for nearly 3 decades, since my Disney days and into my own company and organization. And it's been great. The thing about Disney is it's people, for instance, we'll invite a hospital to come. And by the way, we not only benchmark Disney, we benchmark other great organizations like JetBlue or Harley
Yeah.
Davidson or Ritz-Carlton, whatever. There's some great organizations out there. A hospital, for instance, will come, they'll bring their staff, their executives. They'll say, yeah, we want to benchmark Disney, but really we want to see a lot of different hospitals. But the problem is when we take them to the hospitals, they become very comparative. They go, well, they have a different, nonprofit status. Oh, they've got, this kind of thing going for them or whatnot. But when you benchmark Disney, it's such an unassuming kind of benchmark that all of a sudden they go, oh, I get it. This is what we're talking about. And they just light up.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a creative element to that like you can look at an organization that's completely different to yours and see some of just the leadership capabilities or anything like that. And it starts to get your wheels turning on how does this relate to, you're right. Like we just talked about a couple weeks ago on this show, like comparison can be a killer, but being able to step outside and to really focus on yourself, but maybe take some advice from something like Disney or so could be wildly beneficial.
We had a grocery store chain, Pick and Pay from South Africa. They came up and they brought their people. In fact, they actually made it a thing for their top 80 employees.
Oh, that's cool.
Their best employees, they got a trip to Walt Disney World, and most of them had never been on an airplane. Most of them had never stayed in a hotel. But we were at the Disney University, and he stopped, and he called back to Joburg and told them they were working on construction of a new grocery store there. And he said, stop construction until I get back home. When he got back home, he said, okay, we're going to have the grocery store, but in the back, we're going to have a corporate university where we can teach and train and develop our employees. And it's going to have a doorway in between the back of the grocery store and so that they can learn, because most of his employees have not gone through high school, much less college.
Yeah.
And so they started a corporate university, and we were invited down there when they opened it. And it was so great to see the energy, enthusiasm for this retailer that came because they took the time to really educate and empower and engage their employees.
Yeah.
So it's fun to see those kinds of things happen with organizations.
Man, that's incredible. Well, I love hearing these stories. It's cool to see like how you can take experiences that you've had, like being a part of Disney, loving Disney from childhood, and being able to help other organizations and companies take a little nugget of that back home. I didn't even realize the scope, like all the way to South Africa, across the world. I'm sure you've dealt with tons of organizations. I think it's incredible. I know it feels like we just scratched the surface in the time that we have today, but we might just have to do this again sometime in the future.
Happy to do so.
Yeah. Well, Jeff, thank you so much again for being on. I always do this with maybe one more minute left. First thing I will say for anybody listening to the show, in the show notes, I'm going to list out all the ways that you can get connected to what Jeff is doing here, like on his podcast, for his company, for all those things. But maybe what's one thing that's a little bit of encouragement for somebody who might listen to this show as we head out?
So the name of my organization is Performance Journeys, and I'm a results kind of person. I set my goals. I'm constantly checking things off the list, but that's only one part. The other part, and I have a logo, and it's actually half of it is a clock and half of it is a compass. The clock represents the results or the performance, but the compass represents the journey.
Yeah.
And I have to continually remind myself that the journey is as important as the performance, and to make sure that I embrace both of those things
Mm.
and not just simply getting results or getting things to happen. So absolutely, it's about the journey as much as it is about the performance.
That's incredible. Jeff, thank you so much for taking time to be with us today. Look forward to hopefully being able to do this again in the future.
No, thank you, Alec. Appreciate the opportunity.
Of
Thank
course.
you.